Hi, I'm Steve Huston, and I'm excited today to bring you a free head drawing lessons, over 3 hours of content. And this is part of a much bigger series, over 15 hours of content. You can find the whole series at newmastersacademy.org. I hope you'll check that out. But for now, let's get to it and try and draw the head with basic instruction and good confidence. This is my basic head structure class. I'm going to show you the basic drawn structure for the head, all the major planes, the major shapes, how the features set in terms of construction lines. We'll get that basic information down. We'll do some assignments with it where you'll draw a little bit with those ideas. I'll draw a little bit with those ideas. We'll look at the old masters and see how they did it. And then we'll bring it all together at the end and hopefully have a good basic constructed understanding of the head by the end of class. So I hope you join me. Okay, as we start with our head now, I think of the head as the first gesture of the body. We're going to talk about the gesture and structure here. The head's the first gesture. As we look at the art, as you look at me, you're going to look here first and then move down through. So if this is a book, chapter number 1 here, we have to get this right, and then everything follows from that. In fact, we can use the head as a yardstick to measure the rest of the body to make sure it follows. So we want to get that head working, and we're going to make it out of the anatomy here. We've got two major anatomical elements. We've got the skull, the full round shape of the skull, and then we've got the mask of the face that holds the features. Those two shapes have to work together, and then we flow off that. All the detail we'll talk about are going to work on these great structures. So we're going to start with these great structures. So let me set this here, and we'll get going. Let's talk about the proportions first. If we look at the shape of the skull, it's going to be an egg shape. Now, as we go through different characters, and we'll save that for a different chapter, but if we go through characters, we'll find that egg shape can change in proportion. It can be a little more spherical. It can be a little more elongated. We're just going to do a basic egg shape here. It could be this. It could be this. Anywhere in there. That's going to be the skull from a profile. Like so. It's going to be crucial to get that egg right. I'll show you why in a moment, because it's going to give us a good connection to our next problem. But we're going to draw that egg. Now, if we saw it from the front view or the back view, that egg, just like looking at a breakfast egg, end on would be a spherical shape. And it will be masked behind the features. I'll show you that in a moment. Or it will be the skull that we see, and we'll see that also momentarily. Shape of the egg, that's our first shape. Shape of the feature mask of the features. Now we can do all sorts of shapes. Let's do a different shape here for a second. I'm going to do an egg, and I'm going to do another egg. Now, the advantage of doing another egg is it gives us kind of a roundness, and everything on the body has a certain softness, roundness. Maybe you're drawing a little child that's very round shape. So that can be seductive to choose that egg shape. The problem is if we draw shapes that are too curvilinear, too rounded, they start to get out of whack. We start to have trouble getting their position. So if we can feel, notice coming back up here now, we did the nice round egg because that was characteristic of what we saw. We made the face shape, I made the face shape, a little square, a little more boxy. By making that second shape, the mask shape, different in character from the first, it distinguishes them. And also notice we have a sense of where one ends and the other begins. So we can get a sense of where the face shape comes off the skull shape. That's going to allow the position to be set more easily. We'll get a quicker read of how that that position is. Now we know immediately that we're looking down slightly with that head. Whereas in here, sometimes it can be a little bit out of whack. What if we have a character with a really full nose and a receding chin? We're not sure whether that would be right or that would be right. It can throw us. But if we're a little squarer, little flatter curve here, rounder curve here, it gives us a good sense of positioning, and that's what we want. Notice we can shortcut this. I can also take this and kind of stylize it and simplify it and group the two shapes, skull and face mask, into one bigger shape, a sailboat shape. The advantage of this is it's much quicker, much simpler. The disadvantage is then we have some work to do to get it back to that true skull shape. But quite often we'll have a hairstyle, say a woman with a ponytail bun that'll cover that. So we have choices there. We can make it a little simpler. We can make it a little more sophisticated. We can keep it a little more open. We can keep it much more completed. And you can choose whichever you prefer. What I want, though, is something that's simple enough for me that I can get it down quickly and effectively, so that I can get it down, have it work to build off of, add other shapes to it, or make it simple yet characteristic, so it not only gets down quickly and fairly easily, nothing's easy in art, especially with the head, but it's characteristic of what I see before me, the character I want to draw, the thing I want to take simply and refine. If it's still characteristic of what I see, the refinement, in this case, shaving off a corner, adding on some bumps and bulges, that kind of stuff, as we'll learn to do in a minute, that's easier. So whatever I choose in my construction, I want to make sure it's simple enough that I can get it down easily, characteristic of what I see, so it reads well right off the bat as a head that's looking down, as a woman with a certain hairstyle, and characteristic so I can refine it and turn it into a advanced finished rendering if I so choose. In other words, I'm going to think like a sculptor. I'm going to start out with something simple, and then I'll refine it. I will add to it, take away from it, build it, and finish it. Now, that's the structural idea. And if you have or plan to go to any of my basic drawing classes, you'll find that I have two ideas, the structure and the gesture. The gesture, there's actually two gestures to the head. There's the gesture of the skull going back this way. Let me switch colors so you can see that. Gesture of the skull going back, and the gesture of the face going down. If we draw it again, you can see by drawing that simple sailboat shape, it's one of the reasons I like it for quick sketches. It's characteristic, it's simple, simple, but it still shows not just a characteristic shape that's useful, but a characteristic of the two gestures of the skull going back. One of the big mistakes people make is they'll have the mask of the face pretty well set, however they've chosen to do it, but then they'll draw the skull this way. They'll give it short shrift. It'll be the wrong proportion. There's not enough there to fit on a neck, for example. Look how skinny the neck gets when you get that skull wrongly set. But also we don't get that drift back. We get a rolling curve up off the face. We don't feel that characteristic move back from face to skull, and it starts to look a little alien. Oftentimes a hairstyle might fill out somehow and hide that drift back, but we still want to feel it. The other thing that we want here, And notice I could make this much more boxy, make much more square choices rather than round choices. So we have a continuum of choices there. Notice what happens when I thrust that skull back, with or without the hairstyle. And I'm really conscious of that move back for the skull as opposed to that movement down for the face. Then I'm going to respect the fact that the skull sits up high at the top of our construction. And that's going to give me a much better fit. And we'll go through this idea of connecting, fitting to the next thing, the neck, in more detail. But notice that we come off the throat, we come off the back of the neck. We put in a little bit of shoulder line so you can get a sense of where we'd be going with that. Notice how high the skull and neck connect. They connect very high. In fact, they connect. Let's do that so you can see what we're after, visualize more clearly. Notice that the head and neck, the skull and neck come together about at the eye line. In other words, if I check, I'm always my own best model. If I feel where the skull meets the meat of the bone of the skull meets the meat of the neck, look at where that is right there. If I throw that skull off, make it too much of a ball, a little ball that looks alien, or a really big ball, like this, notice what happens here. The neck fits too low. Now, if you have a real heroic guy, a Superman character, you can kind of get away with that with the bull neck because the meat fills up and takes us up to that higher, or at least close to that higher level there, and we can get away with that. Actually, the very fine books by Andrew Loomis, he uses this stylization, but he's doing these heroic fashion models, kind of fashion model meets Superman character. And so he can get away with that because he's doing this heroic type. But if you're doing the average person, it's a quite different connection. All right, so again from the profile, we keep that egg shape up high. That gives us a sense of the movement going back. We build the face down. Notice I could do this, I can do this, I can do this, all those choices. Simple yet characteristic. As long as it's that, pick whichever you want or myriad others. So, gesture going back, gesture going down. This is the one that really counts. If you goof this up, we have the problems that I suggested, but the reason I say this one really counts is this is the gesture that's going to then flow into the rest of the body as we move down. So it's the face to the neck to the torso to the hips, legs, all that good stuff. So we want to make sure we're thinking of this movement down. Now let's look at the proportions here. If I were to take this whole structure, notice it's the mask of the face without the features, without the nose sticking out, without the eye sockets digging in. It's the skull without the hairstyle. But if I were to take that bare bones construction, you'll notice that it creates a square that's just slightly longer in the face and slightly shorter in the skull. Okay, so it's not a perfect square. Let's say this would be a perfect square. It's a little longer. And if you're going to screw up, a little longer yet, and what that does is just give a heroic chin. And even if you're doing a woman, it feels attractive. If you get too long, which can happen, then that's a problem. But just a little extra going down. And then notice once you add hairstyle and features, nose pushing out, hairdo pushing back, that can reverse, of course. But that gives you a sense of the construction. remember that, well, let's not remember, let's just take this farther. If we break this whole thing in half, so equal part here and there, more or less. Again, if I'm going to screw up, always a little extra chin is the kind of the default ideal, at least in Western art, in heroic art. But if we get that halfway point, cut it in half, that is basically the eye line. Here's the, let me put a little bit of the eyebrow in there just so you can see it. But notice the eye line where the upper lid meets the lower lid. That's a halfway point. And again, that's about where the neck is. Neck meets skull, somewhere in there. And if you ended up down here or up here, anywhere in that range, you're still good. And more than likely the hairstyle is going to cover it anyway. Or if it's a male with short hair, the filling in of that more massive neck, relatively more massive neck. It's going to take care of it. So we without the hair, skull to chin, cut it in half, you have the eye line. Eye line to chin, cut it in half, you've got the nose. Now it can be a little shorter, a little longer, but that's more or less the nose. And when you say the nose, not the tip of the nose, but where the root of the nose meets the mouth, shape in there. Cut it in half again. The edge of the lower lip on average. And again, if I have a little too much chin, that's better than a little too much upper lip here, upper plane, and too little chin. So I want to keep this a little shorter if I'm going to goof up, that chin a little fuller and bigger if I'm going to goof up. It's always nice as an artist to know which way to screw up, where to err. So if we generally, as we go down, if we make each thing a little bigger than it should have been, nose slightly longer, chin slightly fuller, then the neck a little longer than it should have been, the torso, the limbs, the legs, all the way down, adding that length, it just looks more statuesque or more heroic. That's usually in Western art, especially in Western art, is kind of taken over the world aesthetically at this point. With lots of exceptions, but just in general, that's going to be more idealized. That's why women wear the high heels, longer fingernails, low cut gown here, to putting the hair up. It creates that length that seems more beautiful, more idealized. Let's look at the front view then. Let me go back here. If we come across to the front, now I'm just going to do a sphere. And notice that the eye line here, let me switch here one more time. Notice that the eye line, which was our halfway point, wasn't the skull. The skull could have been where the skull meets the neck, could have been at that point, could have been lower, could have been quite a bit lower, could have been down here. So it doesn't necessarily have any correspondence, could even be higher in some cases. So that skull is coming down and crossing that eye line point at whatever place it crosses it. But the bottom of the egg is a little bit different. The bottom of the egg, we'll make that a little bit fuller down here. In general, if we cut the egg in half, the ball in half, I should say, if we take that spherical end, cut the ball in half, one half, two halves, add another half. If I'm going to screw up, make it a little too long, a little more of a half plus rather than less. But we can use that as a construction of the head, making it a little bit more heroic in the jaw or not, either way. Notice then what we have. We have a head without the ears, without the hairstyle. Put those on a second. We have a head that is 2/2 wide. 2/2 wide. We'll put it down here. 2/2 wide. And we have a head that is 3/2 long. So this is almost a perfect square. It's whatever by whatever. This is a 2/3 proportion, 2 across, 3 down. And that's because we lose the drift of the skull going back. It's now hiding behind the face. We'll see it in a little bit, hiding the face hiding behind the skull. Let's do this. So there is half the skull. There's the rest of that round sphere for the skull. There's adding on to it the rest of the mask of the face, which adds to the other half. There's our 2 by 1, 2, 3 proportion. In that middle proportion, that middle half, the ears will tend to sit in there. They can drop down quite a bit lower. They can every once in a while rise up a little bit higher, although that looks a little wolfish when you do that, a little like an elf or something. But the ears tend to sit somewhere in that middle third. They tend to be symmetrical, although you'll see a lot of people where one ear is actually lower than the other ear. We'll talk about how to draw ear shapes later in detail, but for now you can just do a little C shape, a little egg shape, a more chiseled boxy shape, or any variation of that. Make it more rounded on the bottom, square on the top, any of those. You can curve these lines, anything like that is fine. And we'll find that the cheek, the side of our skull egg, is overlapping that ear and hiding some of it. And so we want to have a sense of that idea, overlapping. It's behind and below. But the ear sits in there. And then this same rule is true, of course. What's going to be true from a profile will be true from the front view. Let's just switch back to this. So if I went back to now my full shape and cut it in half, let's say here, this would be my eye line in there. That's where the upper lid and lower lids, if we just think of it as a real simple almond, we'll have to be more sophisticated than that, but the eye line where upper lid meets lower lid, if it was a little Egyptian, would be where the makeup line is. That's more or less our halfway point, and it's better to make, again, our halfway a little more chin for heroic reasons without the hairstyle. And then if we cut that in half, that's more or less the nose, the root of the nose where it meets the mouth, not the tip of the nose. It might turn up or might hook down in relationship to that. And then if we split that in half, right in here, then that would be where the lips set on that construction line. That halfway point is where the lower lip rests. The rest below that is chin in here. Okay. Now, when you do this front view, again, it's without the hairstyle, but oftentimes you'll lay this out and you go, okay, I did everything I was told to do. It still feels funny. Sometimes you'll lay that out and you'll realize that you've drawn the whole face and you haven't really drawn the skull. And sometimes you'll need to come back then and add a little bit more skull. And maybe even add a little bit more skull up this way. And once again, if you added a little extra chin below, then adding more skull above, you're balancing out. It's not going to look funny. It's not going to look like an alien with a little face down here, squished, or a little infant, fetus kind of thing. So having that extra chin can help for that, because it's really easy from these front views to draw, in effect, an egg. That's a real quick version of this, but notice when I do that, it has a certain character. It's the width up here is equal to the width down here. Whereas here, even with a strong-jawed male, we're going to have the shapes diminish down towards the chin and fill out towards the skull shape. And so it's more of a true chicken egg kind of thing where it's tapering down. It's a truer egg rather than just an ellipse. The other thing I'll do sometimes is notice how adding that squarer mask of the face that we talked about earlier, squaring this out a little bit. When I do that, notice how this line and this line are now parallel to each other. And in fact, they're parallel to the center line. We draw an imaginary center line so that we can space the features. We have a little bit of nose on this side, equal amount more or less on that side. We have a little gap here, then the eye starts. We have the same more or less little gap here, and then that eye starts. So we have that symmetry. The eyebrows arch up, and they're going to be symmetrical, give or take an expression or such off that natural center line. And as soon as we draw then, rather than the egg, a pill shape, a capsule shape, notice when we're thinking that way, then our center line tracks in these more difficult positions. And then we have the tapering chin that is very square off the jaw, or we have the rounder chin that rounds smoothly off the jaw, whichever the character suggests. Younger, feminine, childlike, be a little rounder, squarer, more heroic, more exaggerated, superheroish, more male, little squarer. Take your pick. And once again, as we lay this stuff in, split it in half. There's the eyes. Eyebrow line somewhere over there. We'll look at that. Nose. Lips. The rest is chin. And you might say, whoops, I gave him too much chin, or her too much chin. And you can trim it off before you move on to the next idea. We'll figure out how to add that stuff on momentarily. And then you say, well, I got to get my ears. They're somewhere between the eyebrow line and the ear, incidentally. Come back here up to that third again, and you can see the arch of the eyebrows just on a broad average. Depending on the expressions, the character, the arch of the eyebrows can be at that third line. So notice that I can design the proportions of this head based on halves. Cut it in half, you have the eye line. Cut the lower half in half again, you have the nose line. Cut that lower half in again, you've got the lower edge of the lower lip line. So halving it down gives you your information. Or we can do it in thirds. We can say from the top of the skull without the hair, down 1/3, that's the eyebrow line. Down another third, that's close to the nose line. Down another third, you're at the chin. The hairline would be inside that, breaking that up. So there's several ways to do it. But in any case, we'll go in between the eyebrow line and the nose line for those thirds, 1/3, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So nose to chin is the 3/3, eyebrow to nose is the middle 2/3. The first third is the top there. And then we add our ear somewhere in there symmetrically placed. And then we realize, whoops, we need a little more skull maybe because we just drew a capsule that was perfectly symmetrical. It showed the face shape, didn't give us that fuller skull shape. Then we build off there to build the hairline and all that good stuff and the shape of the styled hair and all that. Okay, so that's our basic idea. Coming back now to this, once I've got a good chin, good back of the skull, however I've done it, good chin, good back of the skull, can be rather sophisticated, very sophisticated, more so than we do here, more like we'll do later, or the simplest possible choice. In either case, they're simple, relatively simple, yet characteristic. I can find now the neck right off this chin. Notice what happens here. The chin goes back this way. That's called the digastric plane. That's the thickness of the face. One of the dangers of drawing the mask of the face is it looks like just a mask, and if you get it some weird angle, it looks like a cutout cardboard, Halloween mask with your cutout features on there, and it's not convincing. So what we need to feel is that bottom plane to the face. It gives it thickness. That's called the digastric plane. It gives thickness here from different angles, as we'll see later. We'll find that more clearly, and it will give us great volume. It'll keep this from looking like it's flat and cut out. Because notice we're working on a flat page, and yet we're trying to get the idea of volume. That's always a hurdle for the artist to jump. So we go along that digastric plane, and then we go right down the throat, and if there's a big Adam's apple, we ignore it and swing back. And unless you're a ballet dancer or a soldier at attention, usually there's a little bit of sag. I'll exaggerate it. A little bit of sag. So that neck to chin, from the pit of the neck to the chin, thrusts forward. And that gives us, even in a fairly upright view, there's a thrusting forward that has this beautiful movement forward. And we'll find that that becomes a dance of forms that plays all the way through the body. So chin through the simplified neck to the pit of the neck. Anywhere in here is fine. You made it a little too long. You made it a little too swinging back, or a little too not quite thrusting forward enough. Anywhere in there, you're probably going to be fine. Notice that making it too long is a much better mistake than making it too short. Length for the next form number 1, form number 2, construction number 1, construction number 2. Each time that making the next structure all the way through the body a little longer is a better mistake to make usually than the reverse. So, but anywhere in there we're good. So let's pick one. Now I'm going to come off the back of the skull. Coming off the back of the skull. Anywhere in here is good. Your only real guide will be not to make this too skinny or too thick. Make sure the neck speaks to the character of the model. Is it a big bull-necked guy, or is it long and wispy neck? Make sure it rings true for that. And if you're a little off, you should have made a little chubbier, should have made a little skinnier, you can always add more on later as you come to that realization. So as long as you're in the ballpark, you're good. And notice this great change here. Notice how low the the neck starts in the front. And notice how high. And it may not be that high. It could be, we're in here. Again, you have room for error. But notice how high, let's just pick this one, let's say in the middle. Notice how much higher the neck connects to the head structure in the back. Connects very high in the back, connects very low in front. And getting that high-low is going to be what gives it credibility. And notice when we put on our costumes here, let me button this, notice how my shirt tracks that same high-low. Notice how the collar sits up high in back and sits down low in front, following that same torquing dynamic of the neck. That's going to lead us in a very interesting way into the body. We'll see that a little bit later. Again, tease on that. If it should be a little bit fatter, it's out here. Anywhere in there is good, as long as this is ballpark and as long as that sits up high. So my two parameters are to make the neck in the ballpark of the correct thickness. Don't make it super skinny. Don't make it super fat. If it's way out here, it's a problem. If it's way in here, it's a problem. Somewhere in that mid-range of thickness. And make sure the neck connects into the skull or underneath the hairstyle. Maybe the hairstyle does this. Make sure the neck feels like it connects to that skull up high in back. And make sure that it feels like it connects to the face down low in front, and you're good. Now, if we go to a front view, we will find on a younger model, child, young adult, you'll oftentimes get a thinner neck. Not every time, but just on average. So if you make it thinner, it's going to look younger and or more feminine. If you make it thicker, it'll look more male, a little older, mature, and more heroic. In here are all those. And if you then get very aged model, it can thin out again on you. But if you want to do a heroic male, as Loomis did, as I mentioned before, you'll make the neck almost as wide or as wide, just depending, as the jawline on the male. If you want it to be more feminine or younger, you'll make the neck a little more narrow than the fattest part of the jawline, somewhere around that nose line, basically. Where the nose line is, that's the widest part of the jaw because it's coming off that big ball of the head, the skull, before it tapers to the skinny, narrow chin. So anywhere in here is good. The only time you're going to make it much bigger is if you got some lineman for the 49ers, some football team, some big, massive athlete type, bodybuilder, all that kind of stuff. Or you're drawing a superhero, a character that's hyper-heroic, comic book, Captain America, the Hulk, that kind of stuff. But with the normal average person, average, mature, athletic male, you're not going to get any wider than that. So notice when we add, let's do it again down here. When we go down low in front, high in back, pay special attention to the thickness of the neck and correct accordingly, we're doing an hourglass kind of shape. Now the head can really articulate on the torso and twist that neck into all sorts of stuff back and forth. It can pinch it like an accordion, stretch and pinch like an accordion. But in general, most of the time, you're going to feel that hourglass idea. That kind of thing going on. So when it's more profile, think of the hourglass. When it's more front or back view, think of the tube, just a simple tube. And it's a tube that's stiff and straight, if it's a guarded attention, or it's a tube that is curved if the head's in some dynamic position in relationship to the body. So it can curve off like so. All right, so now let's start looking at other positions here. We've got the basics. What happens if we get behind? Well, from the front, the mask shape with all the features dominates the skull. You don't see much skull. In fact, drawing that capsule or that tube idea shows you can do a pretty good head, and then you just fill in with a little bit of skull you missed. But on the back view, it's all skull, and the face is hidden. And that creates a different set of problems. So what we're going to find, and again, we are our own best models. So we'll notice that the skull is now facing you guys, facing the camera, facing the viewer in our artwork. And I notice it goes down into the neck, of course. Whatever hairstyle in there is in there. But head, skull and neck flow together. And the face is around the front, hidden. So that's, as I said, it's going to create its own set of problems. The big, simple shape is easier. We don't have all those pesky features to plot out carefully in proportions, halves and thirds and all of our choices in proportion. But it's going to be harder to place this thing in space and be effective with it because it's going to be real easy to make it look like a lollipop, just a ball on a stick, and it's not going to be very satisfying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take special attention to how the neck fits. And let's go back to the front view again. And do a quick version of our face. And we've got room for error on all this kind of stuff. Do that, just do that much so you get the sense of things. And then we had that tube of the neck from a front view we said, and we just kind of stopped it there. It was curved or it was straight, but it was just a tube. The fact is, when I'm learning any particular body part, the head, the hands, the rib cage, whatever it is, I want to pay some attention. In fact, I want to pay special attention to how it connects to the other or others, the other body parts. So I want to know how the rib cage connects into the shoulder girdle and into the head and neck, and definitely how it connects down into the pelvis. I want to know how the thigh connects to the hips and down into the lower leg. In this case, I want to know how the head and neck connect into the shoulder line and then into the rib cage. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to depart from our subject so that when we get a mastery, control of our subject, get confidence in our subject, then we can integrate that into the whole figure. That's probably our goal. And even if we're doing a portrait, a bust shot, portrait commissions is our bread and butter, then we still need to show that connectivity. Very seldom are we going to have a floating head without anything to it. So always pay attention to the connections. And when I'm drawing from life or drawing from reference, I'll spend several drawings, maybe every fifth drawing, working on the connections. Or if I have more time, I lay in a good head. Then I'll go ahead and lay in some of the connective tissue, the connective shapes for the shoulder line, say, so I can feel how it moves into that new whole. So if I was drawing these two together and I had more time, I'd go to the connection at the elbow, spend more time drawing and analyzing that so I feel a more confident and a truer connection there for my audience and a better understanding for me. So the connection, the joints are key. The transition points where you go from one part to the next are key in our understanding, so we need a little bit of information. So head and neck. Now, pit of the neck will be somewhere down here. Again, another third of a head. So you can use the skull or hairline with a heroic pose, and with a fuller skull, notice how actually the hairline's a good place to pick a third, 1/3, 2/3 down to the nose, 3/3 down to the chin. Notice I didn't do all that great a job in doing my thirds. This is too much, this is too little, maybe this is just right. And it's still forgiving, isn't it? It still feels good enough. And if it doesn't feel like a likeness of our model, because we're drawing some big chin fellow, we can always add a little bit more if we need it. So we've got room for error. We don't have to nail exactly. If we're sculptors, we can always add a little extra clay later or take a little clay away as we need. This goes down. The neck will end at the pit of the neck in front. As I said, it's another third, equal to these more or less. If I'm going to screw up, better to make it too long and make it more of a half. Oftentimes, if you're doing a statuesque woman, you'll give her a longer neck. It's more attractive, it seems to be, more in terms of the Greco-Roman classical sense, that longer neck's more attractive. The male bull neck, a little shorter, is fine. So anywhere from that third to half range gets us to the pit of the neck. Let's stay with the third, which is usually more accurate on average. Now, what I'm going to find is I'm going to have a shoulder line, and the shoulder line can be, You can pick out any of a number of anatomical points, and I won't go through the minutiae of that, but anywhere in here is fine. Anywhere where you go from top to side, that shoulder line into the arm transition. Here, here, here. We've got room for error, doesn't matter. Pick a spot. You can pick it right at the collarbone, or I'm sorry, right at the pit of the neck, or it can be a little bit above, anywhere in there. Usually it's a little bit above is usually more accurate because we have that slightly hunching posture that I talked about, and that drops the pit of the neck. If you come up like this at attention, then it gets up closer to the shoulder line. But anywhere in there is great. Shoulder line, and then we're going to have the shrugging muscles, the trapezius, and they're going to be the transition shape to take us from the tubular neck out to that shoulder line, and it's just a sagging triangle. But it's a triangle. It feels good to do that, so sometimes I'll take extra time just to squeeze it, but basically what I'm looking for is that goes right behind my neck. Where is it going? Behind the tube of the neck. Here's the tube. This is a top and back muscle. It goes down all the way to the mid-back trapezius, and it's a shrugging muscle. It does this, basically. So all I'm going to do is do a sagging triangle. The skinnier I make the neck, the more I sag it, the younger and the more feminine it will seem. The thicker I make the neck, and the fuller, in fact, it can bulge over this way, even if you're doing a heroic character. The fuller I make that triangle, it's going to look more mature, not old as in elderly, but more mature and more male. And also more heroic goes with that, of course. So Superman might be here, star football player might be here, the average guy on the street might be there, an old man or woman might be way down here. But anywhere in there is good, as long as it's similar to what we see, characteristic of what we see. Typically, it's a sagging triangle, as I said. And so notice that we have, we'll just default to one type now, the more heroic male. This is the neck coming from behind the face, coming down, and it just fades away, actually, in subtle ways that we'll deal at in another lecture group, not in the head group. And then this is the shrugging muscle going behind it. So you can imagine it going way up and attaching to the skull and back. We'll see that in a moment. And then we have the neck in front of that sagging triangle. The tube is in front of the top triangle. The neck is in front of the trapezius. And so if we were to draw this as just a really simple tube that were slightly underneath, we'd feel that. That's behind. So now when we come here, I'm going to do the same thing. I don't have the mask of the face, though. I'm going to draw the tube of the triangle. And I'll make it nice and fat and wide, or nice and skinny, however seems appropriate. I'll do that. Let's color code it. It'll actually attach up here. Because there's the neck of our heroic male, let's say. Right there, so it attaches up here, even though the egg sits much lower. And it doesn't come to a point. And if you felt back there, you could feel that. It's two cables, basically, that split around the spine, and they have thickness. So it comes up like this, sags down this way, and sets on the shoulder line. We're doing more male looking, aren't we? Because that's a long, fairly full, let's make it a little fuller, trapezius, and we have that nice wide neck. That's what's doing most of the work. And notice now, over here, we had the neck tube in front of the triangle. Now we have the triangle in front of the neck, like so. Pretty sophisticated stuff there. Since we don't have all the features to mark out, this looks pretty easy now to me. I just have to get this stuff plotted out, basically, with construction lines and little dashes, in effect, for the placement, the rough placement of the features. I can just do this little kind of robotic schematic hairline, all that good stuff. That's pretty easy compared to this. There's some sophisticated thinking going on. And notice that we had the neck, and then the mask of the face was in front of the neck. So the face is in front of the neck, and the neck's in front of the trapezius, the shrugging muscle. From the back view, it reverses. The triangle trapezius shrugging muscle is closest to us. The neck is farther, and the face unless we have a huge neck, we'll see a little bit of face. The face is farthest yet. A little bit of face. A little bit of face for that wider chin and skinnier neck relationship. And then notice where here the ears were almost an afterthought. We stuck them on because they're visible and they deserve to be there. But they didn't really add a lot of information, any new information to the mix. It was just plotting out one more detail, like picking out eyeglasses. I put on eyeglasses, not really giving me more information, just a new shape in there. So from a front view, the straight arm front view, the ears don't add much other than a more refined character of what we were seeing. But here, the ears are going to be much more important because they are going to be the only feature that we see. All the other features are hidden around that far side. So drawing those ears are important. And notice how I drew them. I just drew them like this. In fact, I made a little double line or a thick, dark construction either way, and that shows the thickness of the ear. As we get into the ear construction, and we'll do segments, chapters on each feature in detail. There's a lot to be understood with each and every feature. One of the things we'll notice is that C shape or whatever hybrid shape we drew for it has a thickness. Otherwise, it's going to be flat and not be believable. It'll have a thickness just like the mask had that digastric plane thickness idea. So we could draw the ear from a front view like this to show that thickness. Think of it as a disc, a slice of a tube, like that. And so when we put the cheek on it, we're seeing this much of that disc or slice, and the rest is hidden. From a back view then, we'll see that whole back of the ear thickness here, and that's what we're drawing. So drawing a double line, in effect, shows us that thickness. All this subtle stuff in here we don't have to worry about because it's just a construction at this point. This is the simplest, most characteristic thing we can do. Again, it's in that middle third range. But it's harder to see that, isn't it? Because the chin gets lost down here. The hair is here, but we can't see the eyebrow line. We can't see a hairline. So we can't inch our way down to that or inch our way up to that position. So it's a little trickier. Then you'll have the hairline will do whatever it does, maybe a little ducktail shape in here. Or it's whatever, long hair covers, whatever going on there. But we'll just do that. That sits in there. And each of these little details, you could have a little cowlick spiral here, or this could be a bun, or ponytail hair. Any of those details will help. And notice that we can take, again, the head, the skull, I should say, the skull, the face, the neck, and we can turn this whole thing into a simpler idea, just a tube, kind of this idea. So I'm going to draw a tube, and then here's my shoulder line, let's say, and then I need to go back through those machinations we just went through. Let's say this is the center of the head is right here. That's that. There's the neck. Here's the ears here. You can turn them this way if it's a complete back view. you can turn them in the same direction if they start turning into some kind of 3/4. So if this head is starting to turn this way a little bit, then we can turn the ear that way, and we can just place it in that mid-range of the structure. Maybe we see a little bit of the jaw going into the chin before it gets lost. Maybe we don't. That's that. Okay, so that gives us a basis for connection. We're not showing any of the articulation yet of doing this kind of stuff. We'll deal with that later, but that gives us the basics. Okay, the last thing I should have mentioned earlier and I didn't. Let's do this. That ear, when we place that ear, we said if we see it from a front or back view, the ear sits in the middle third of the head, more or less. You can use the top of the skull or you can use the hairline. I usually use the hairline. Feels a little more accurate. It ends up making the features a little fuller, gives the chin a little bit more oomph. When we use the top of the skull, oftentimes the chin feels a little shorter and the nose may be a little too big. But anyway, anywhere in there is good. So the ear sits in the middle section of the head. There's a section on top, there's a section on the bottom. The middle section is where the ears float in more or less. They fill up the whole section. They're smaller than that. They can be slightly below it or slightly above it, but they're in that mid-range. When we get to a profile, we can see the same thing happening. Let's put our box back in here and notice the way I drew that. Bad teacher. It should be a little less here and a little more here. There's our box there. There's our box there, more or less, without features or hairstyle. A little longer in length, a little shorter in width. Going across. Notice if we come in front of the ear in that sideburn area, cut it in half, the ear is very close to the halfway point of the head there. So the middle of the ear, or the whole ear, sits in the middle of the head from top to bottom, however you want to do it. The middle of the ear is at the middle, or the ear sits in the middle third. Take your pick, doesn't matter. And also it's in the middle this way. The front of the ear touches or comes very close to that mid-range, give or take features and hairstyle. Like so, it sits in that mid-range. That's incredibly useful because now look what happens. If I take that same, I'm going to use the simplest possible shape now. Take that same sailboat shape. If I take this section here and cut it in half and put it in there, make sure it sits more or less in the bottom third. But if you're off some, notice how this got much bigger. This got much shorter. Doesn't hurt anything really, but you can adjust it down or trim it back accordingly. But when I do that, it feels like a nice profile, like this. Let's do it again. I'm going to draw that same sailboat shape. And now, instead of putting it in the mid area, more or less, I'm going to push it really close or fairly close to the front of the face. When you do that now, notice that the face, the jaw, the face always sits in front of the ear. It ends in front of the ear. It doesn't go behind the ear, it sits in front of the ear. Some people will draw that ear and then they'll put the face back here. No, it's got to sit in front of the ear. Look how little face there is now. Let me flesh this out a little bit. I'll show you how to do this another time, but just so you can see it. There's a little bit of the nose, a little bit of lips, eyebrow, eyelashes, hairstyle. Let's do this to make it easy on us. There's the neck, appropriate thickness. We'll deal with how to articulate this later. Let's just leave it like that. But notice if I push the ear towards the front of the face, you've done this. You've gotten behind the head. The farther we push that ear to the front of the face until it overlaps it slightly off axis, overlaps it perfectly into a back view, that ear positions the head this way in the rotation. Now, when we've got a front of the face, it's less important because we have all the features. But once we get past the profile, then those features, look at how the features, the nose, and again, we'll look at this more carefully later, the nose and the lips and the eyelashes are overlapped by that cheek and jaw construction. And we're starting to lose those. So placing that ear, let's do it again. Now I'm going to push the ear back here. I'll keep it in the middle third, more or less. I'll make it a little smaller, a little bigger, anywhere in there. I can always adjust it slightly if I need to. But notice now when the ear pushes back, getting very close to or equal to the back edge. More and less. More and less, more and less. Now we start to get a 3/4 view. Notice now if we did the center line of the features, it'd be over here and we're in a 3/4 view. In there. Okay, so the placement of the ear, crowd the skull, you're more of a front 3/4 view. Crowd the face, you're more of a 3/4 back view. Get the ears on the outside or very close to the outside, you're in a full or more or less full back view. Put them on the outside and front, ditto for the front view. So where you push the ear this way or that gives you incredible information, gives your audience incredible information very, very quickly about how it's placed in space. All right, so the ear is a wonderful thing. And this is the simplest of our choices is my favorite for these simple constructions. If I'm doing a real careful portrait, I'll break the shape of the skull down and the face carefully. But I almost always start with this, even if I'm doing a big painting with a big, fully realized head. It's just easier to place. So let me talk about the ear again. So as I said, if we crowd the ear into the face, we're getting behind that face. And we'll notice that the brow, cheek, jaw start to overlap and cover our features. They hide away. And that's true, of course. Let's same way if I crowd the skull, now it's turning towards us. And we don't need any more information than that to start to get the idea that we're now in a 3/4 front view. We're certainly going to want to do more, but immediately that gives us and our viewer, our audience, a clue into what the position is. But also notice if I push the ear down lower, let me do this. I'm going to more fully realize that skull. In fact, I'm going to make it boxy. Because when I get into difficult perspectives, the squarer I make things, the more clearly it is placed in space. It's the corners and the alignment of the sides that do our vanishing points, if we were to be that ambitious, and give us a sense of true position. If I do roundness, and again, look to my basic drawing lessons for a full explanation of this. But the rounder things are, it can have a good sense of rendered volume, but it doesn't have great sense of position. Are you behind this ball or in front of this ball? Till you get something else in relationship to it, you don't know. But here you know immediately how it's sitting, that it's tilted, facing, tipping in certain three-dimensional position. So the squarer things go, the better in terms of working out difficult perspectives, difficult proportions, because we can break those corners down into measurable segments and difficult dynamic objects. So notice by pushing that ear a little bit lower from a, just really generically, let's do this and this, 1, 2, 3. Let's say those are equal, and we put the ear right in the middle, that way and this way. That's a perfect profile. We'd add on all the stuff. I'll add a little bit of the stuff just so you can feel the truth of that idea. That's a perfect profile. Give or take proportions, of course, of the character you're drawing. If I move it this way, it turns. If I move it this way, it turns. If I push it up this way, or if I push it down that way, it's now going to turn and, well, not turn, tilt in and out of the picture plane. So by pushing the ear down a little bit lower, I'm going to exaggerate it here. And we'll see this better when we get some reference and we do more sophisticated versions of these things. But for now, this is as far as we're going to take it. There's that kind of stuff. Again, I'll help you work that out more carefully later, but just so you can see in context. Notice how we have the ear less than an ear away from the chin, or even let's say a full ear away from the chin. But here we have an ear and a half or an ear and 2/3 from the top of the head. That wasn't true here. We were very close here. So as the ear gets lower, we start to get on top of it. You can see it right here. Here's my ear somewhere in the middle. Now as I do this, the chin's receding, so the ear's getting closer to the bottom of the head structure, and the skull's coming and revealing more, and so we're getting visually more mass on top. And then, of course, the reverse would be true. Push the head down, we're on top of the head, just like we're on top of a tube. Push the head up, push the ear up, and it's going to make us feel like we are underneath the head. Again, I'll show you the subtleties of this in a later time. I'm just putting them in now so you can really clearly visualize what I'm saying. Notice when you lay in these very simple shapes, sometimes you have to modify them to make them ring true for that particular dynamic position. In the simpler positions, we can do simpler shapes. In more dynamic positions, it's the difference between looking at a box or looking at a box. In the more dynamic positions, we have to articulate those shapes a little more carefully. So you might find you need to lift a little bit, you need to square out a little bit. But notice also, we could conceive of this as a boxy form. I'm going to make it very simple here. Again, I'll describe and explain that structural stuff later. But we can make it rather boxy. And so the ear could be on the side of the box, and the features could be on the front of the box. The ear can be on the side of the box, and all the other features are on the front of the box. Or we can have it as a tubular idea. We can conceive of this, we're underneath not a box, but a tubular idea. And the ear is on the side of the tube. And the rest of the features are on the front of the tube, like so. Front of the tube. And notice what I'm doing here. Just generically, I'm going to make the eyebrow line, and specifically the arch of the eyebrow, the height of the ear. That's not going to be true for every model or even most models, but it's roughly true. Oftentimes the ear will be close to the eye line, but I love those arching eyebrows. We'll see this when we get into more clear, more sophisticated structure. If I use the eyebrow line to the ear, I have a natural construction line, whether I'm doing a tube or a boxy idea, a tube or a boxy idea. Notice that this is the eyebrow line, and this is the movement of the ear, and it can be a rounder conception or a squarer conception. Here's the eyes, here's the nose. We'll talk about how to do that. Here's the mouth, the chin. Notice that now I have to flesh out my skull or hairstyle to make it ring true. There's the squarer conception, there's the rounder conception. Chin is on the bottom of the tube, or chin is on the bottom of the box. Take your pick. And of course, we could do it egg-like. And we could do eyebrow line to ear, eye line, nose, mouth, chin, adjust that jawline, and again, make sure that you're getting enough skull there. Oftentimes you have to add a little skull on these things, add a little skull or refine the skull. Okay, and then we add if it's more front than side, we add the tube. If it's more back than side, we add the tube. If it's more of a more side than front, we can do the hourglass idea. If it's somewhere in between, 3/4, you can take your pick, do either one. So this would work okay doing that too, hourglass in those 3/4. All right, so that's the basic head shape in basic articulating perspective, no deep perspective. We're conceiving it as simple forms, simple shapes, and it can be a simple shape that's square, simple shape that's more tubular, simple shape that's very round. It can be a hybrid of all those things. The choice doesn't matter as long as it's simple yet characteristic with what we see. It doesn't depart radically from what we see unless we're doing a radical piece of art. And we're going to pay very close attention that whatever we do, by the end of it, we feel that the skull drifts back as the face drifts down. Skull drifts back, face drifts down. Unless it's very close to a full front or back view, we're going to feel that skull having a motion back that it's distinct. You can think of the parting of the hair. If you have a hairstyle like this, where the part is going to run along that axis back into the skull. All right, there's one last point I want to make here before we move on. If we look at our skull, so we get this idea of our ear, the ear is about right here. Remember, the ear sits right behind the end of the jaw. The jaw sits right in front of the ear. So this is the sideburn area of the hairline. The ear sits in here. And so just watch this little pointer, my finger here. As we turn this way, you can see how the ear is going to crowd the face and eventually overlap the face. That was the point we were making earlier. And then as we come back this way, the ear is going to, let's do this for the ear, I guess. The ear is going to crowd the back of the skull and then overlap the back of the skull. And so that ear gives us a great landmark for how this turns, especially in this back 3/4 range where we don't have the features as landmarks. These features are fantastic landmarks for plotting out the structure, the three-dimensional position of the head. When we get into this 3/4 back view to the other side, we lose that ammunition. So then the ear becomes crucial. So there we have it there. And then likewise, if we tilt say this is the top of the ear. As we tilt the head down, notice how the ear is now crowding the bottom of the face visually and moving well away from the top of the face. So if you draw that ear lower in your skull shape, your sailboat shape, or whatever construction idea you're using, it's going to help immediately put that head in that top orientation. And likewise, if it comes this way and the top of the ear starts to crowd the top of the head, now we know that we're getting underneath it. Again, it becomes a great landmark, especially in these positions, to show that. So anyway, that little point. Now let's move on to our master drawings and have some fun. Okay, now we have our old masters to look at. We've got Hans Holbein on the left and Raphael on the right. And if we look at the Holbein, you can see the egg. Now notice we have a hat here. And so the skull's up in here. And if I draw that basic egg shape, we'd see the hat's up here. Now remember, when we do the egg shape, though, it's going to be much more accurate to what we're after if we make that egg shape a little fatter at the top. More of a true chicken egg rather than a ellipse. We can do that. Or we could make it more of a capsule shape, which means flat on the sides. And notice if we look towards the hairline, I'm going to modify the hairline just slightly, down into the lower jaw, you can feel that kind of flattening there. The problem with that is, let's go back again. Let me get that color back. Problem with that is she's got those wonderful cheekbones. And so what I'm looking for is a simple shape, egg or capsule, but the most characteristic. And so I want the sense of those fine cheekbones popping out. Let's do it this way. And so maybe the bulging egg. Or you might even modify further. And notice with this particular character, we could modify. Maybe we use more of a diamond shape to show off those cheekbones. Again, watch that diamond doesn't distort and lose the mass of the skull. But maybe through the hairline, we put a little diamond shape inside the egg. So notice that it's simply a characteristic, and there's a nice range of variations we can do. We can modify that shape. It can be elliptical. It can be capsule-like. It can be egg-shaped that has a fatter end and a more narrow end. It can be more diamond-shaped and more and more and more. Lots of choices there. Round on the top, square on the bottom. You have lots of ways to go. As long as it's simple yet characteristic, you choose. And if you're doing refined heads, portraiture, or trying to bring in personality rather than a generic sense of a head, but a personality head, then you'd want to modify those shapes, simple yet characteristic. So you want to stay nimble with that. If we look at the Raphael, it's chubbier features, and so the egg is fuller and rounder and more, a little bigger here, and more characteristically a classic egg. Whereas on the Holbein, we could argue for a rather squarish bottom here because of that strong jaw, this woman. But with the Raphael, that's not the case. We're going in, of course, for the little baby here too. We're going for that nice, simple, and much more true egg shape. And in any of these cases, there's great subtle variations of the final contour. It wobbles, bumps, sharpens up, smooths out, does all those different things that a contour is going to do, but that's in the finish stage. So again, we're making it simple yet characteristic. And as I've drawn the Raphael, the mother here, mother and child, we can see then simple construction lines show us the center line, the eye line, the eyebrow line, the hairline, the line of the nose, and the chin. Darken that up for us a little bit. And so we can break that basic idea down in proportion, just a general generic proportion, about halfway. Now in this case, that's not quite true. Let's put it down there. It's a little more than halfway on top. The top is catching more and the bottom's a little less. And with the hairstyle, that's even more exaggerated. But she's actually, the position of this head is actually slightly underneath us. She's tilting forward. So if we put a bucket on her head, we'd be on top of the bucket that way. So that means if we were to draw our construction line, that would stay the same. This line, of course, then would turn this way. And so the eyes are on a slight arc moving over. And as we find that tilt with the ears and such, then we're losing, as it moves down into the paper, we're losing a little bit of face at the lower end. It's getting a little shorter. Head's coming up over the top towards us. We're getting a little bit greater lift of head. And notice that what I drew here is a more exaggerated version than what our friend Raphael has done. And that adds even more skull to the view. This one has more skull, this has less skull, and this has much less face, and this a little more. So here's an exaggerated version of the slight tilt here. This is a slight tilt compared to this one, which is perfectly straight on and formal. And I'll notice that even the craftsmanship brings this out, but just in terms of design, when we have a very formal pose like this, notice what it does to the feel of the piece. Notice how this is more distant. Now she has that character, but that's one of the reasons he chose this front view, is she's very formal and standoffish, whereas this is a mother that has great empathy. And so we feel that empathy and we're drawn into it. And so the slight tilt of the head off axis and the slight tilt of the head into the picture plane adds to that intimacy and that informal or compassionate view. And then this little baby's doing what he's doing this way. And those baby proportions would have an effect that we'll save for another day. Once again, always a big danger when we're drawing these egg-like, capsule-like constructions of the head. Notice that on this mother figure here, I drew the egg without enough skull. And so the skull would really be out here, a fuller egg this way. And so really pay attention to that. It's a real killer for your drawing if you don't give that fullness of that skull. It just it loses character. If you're doing a cartoon or something, that could play into the style actually, but in realism, you've got to feel that full skull. Usually you're saved even if you screw up your construction. Even if I had stuck with that original construction, by the time we add the hair, the mass of the hair on there, that's going to cover that mistake. But still, we want to see it as a truism. So basically, we're going to draw the egg of the head, or whatever simple shape, but egg of the head, and then we're going to draw a T, center line, eye line. That's going to split it in halves, 2 halves here, 2 halves here, more or less, give or take the dynamic position of the head, give or take the portraiture, the personality, the quirky proportions to the head, but a halfway point. And then we're going to build off that. And notice that the the band of the hat here acts pretty much as our hairline. And so if we break it down into hairline and eyebrow line to nose line to mouth, to chin, those end up being about thirds. Now, if you've got a more dynamic, dramatic, heroic figure, you can actually go up to the top of the head, which would be top of the skull minus the hairstyle, and do thirds down, fuller nose, and that's actually truer in this case. And then the chin, despite its strength, chin and jaw is a little less so because it's a woman, more heroic character, especially if it's a male, mature male, it'd be down here and you could break the thirds. But typically on a realistic figure, if you're not trying to stylize heroism into the mix, you go from hairline to eyebrow line to nose line to chin, and that's your thirds. Eye line is below there, and that's your halfway point, top of the head to eye line to chin. All right, here we have Piazzetta in a more or less perfect profile, somewhere around that. And let's look at this from a couple different ways. Now, notice this strong line here. We want to be careful of that. What I really want is the line of the face, and I'm cutting off the features. And specifically, we'll see this more clearly when we get into the placement of the features and all their various structures. I want to go where the forehead, more or less, where the forehead bumps into the nose, right there. And where the lips bump into the chin, right there. So these 2 points, and then up somewhere near the hairline. Of course, that can change radically depending on the recession. And it can be anything close to that. It doesn't have to be right on the money, but in there. Now, that's the gesture of the face going down that I'm going to build my structure, my mask on. The gesture of the skull going back, I don't want to go down this way and make that more or less a right angle. What I want it to do is rise up and back, and it actually does, just the drawing fools us for a moment. So it goes up this way. Notice how that opens up there. That angle opens up a little bit from a right angle. If we were to do that sailboat shape, it'd be here or here, anywhere in there is fine. If it were to be the egg shapes, let's just bring this right back. You could actually, if you wanted to, start with the egg of the skull in here, down in here, anywhere in this range is good. And then you come right off that egg again down to your construction or your gesture line for the face. So this is an egg that has an axis going back, but notice the way I drew it, it's actually going back and up a little bit. So again, it implies that opening up of that angle. Let's make a clearer point of that. Look what happens if I go the other way, like that. It destroys the structure of the skull. That's bad news there. Or if we had the face coming down and the skull shape doing this. We'll see a Raphael towards the end of our little series here, and it suggests this, and we have to look past a glance to see what he's doing there. But if we do that, where this is drifting down, it destroys the skull. You don't have enough brains in there to be a functioning human being when you do that. So we don't want to do that. We want it to open up. And then we can come off that back of the skull this way and do a modified triangle. Or as we said before, we can use a simplified hairline in front of the ear and over to the chin down here, and feel the mask of the face, that mask here. Notice how the ear sits right in the center. Now he's just barely turning away from us. And so that ear is crowding just a little bit in this case, and it varies from person to person and also canon to canon. Each artist and art movement will idealize or distort the figure in a certain way, and so that will play sometimes quite loosely with the facts. But in this case, we have the ear, the center of the ear, as I said, right in the middle of the head, even without the little bit of hair lifting up. So in there. But anyway, it's following our idea truly enough, close enough to work with. Notice how the top of the ear lines up with the eyebrow line. That's one thing we want to pick up consistently, wherever the eyebrow line is, usually where the arch of the eyebrow is. We want the ear to be at that or close to that. And that's going to give us a lot of good material to work with when we get into more dynamic poses, as we will in a bit. Notice how the bottom of the ear sits about at the bottom of the nose there. And so the ear is sitting in that middle third, and by keeping it well away from the top of the skull and well away from the bottom of the skull, bottom of the chin, face, it gives us that sense that we're looking more or less straight on to this figure, maybe slightly on top. So anyway, the placement of the ear in the middle from left to right, in the middle region from top to bottom, gives us a sense that that's a solid basic profile. All right, here's a Tiepolo. And here you can see the simple construction idea never taken really any farther. We've got mom here with a simple egg shape, but since she's off axis, she's in a 3/4 view, then we're getting a little bit of the skull back here. So let's go back, look at that again, and see exactly what our friend's doing here. There's the center line of those features. Here's the eyebrow line or eye line, the T idea. Notice how when we start getting into these perspectives, we're starting to get off axis from a perfect front or a perfect profile, then our T starts to get into dynamic positions. The head's tilting down, so the T tilts. We're underneath and in a 3/4 view to the eyebrow line and eye line, so the eyebrow and eye line tilt up, and so that T throws off into a dynamic position. So let's look at that one more time. And there's several ways we can do this. All right, so we can draw our sailboat shape, and we can take in the whole head. Notice how we're going back here. There it is there. Or we could have started with the center line going back and then add on a little bit more. Or start outside, put the center line. Either way is fine. And then the eyebrow line or eye line. I usually do the eyebrow line because you get those arching eyebrows, so the clear drawn in shape of the eyebrow rather than the little vaguer sense of where the eye is. So I use that to place it and then work off your proportions from there. The other way we could have done this, of course, is the egg shape. I do not want to do an egg shape for the whole thing. That's too crude. That's simple but not characteristic. There's two shapes going on here, and as soon as we move from a front view towards a profile or even into a back view, we're going to see the face shape and the skull shape. So we need a construction strategy that shows both. So I want the face shape as a mask, and it could be rounder or squarer. His is much rounder. Another artist would make it squarer. Center line is right through there. Eyebrow line is right there. Eye line, if you wanted that too, is right there. And then we're going to add on a little bit of the egg of the skull. Notice as soon as we do that, we're getting that gesture down for the face, gesture back for the skull that we have to have. Let's look at our little baby character here. Here we've got the face tilting this way, eyebrow line, center line. Sometimes it helps to do the construction lines first. Sometimes it's better, probably usually it's better to do the big constructed face, gesture, structure. There it is there. And then we add the center line on. Now we end up with that sailboat shape. It's very pointy. It's got those corners. So maybe because this is a baby, we're going to start with the egg of the skull first, because that kind of dominates. We're in a 3/4 view, and the head's tilted down, and so we see that strong egg shape. And then we add on a rounder mask here, picking up our construction lines on that, like so. The eyes sit in here, like that, and you can mark off. Let's do it one more time. There is the skull shape. Here is the face shape. And here we can complete it through or leave it open-ended, whichever way is appropriate. Since we don't have a hairline, it's a little easier to imagine it as open-ended maybe. Here's the center line, eyebrow line. In there, you can see a little bit of the ear here. Right there's a little bit of the ear. Now notice, as you've already have, I'm sure, the simple conception of this. He's just breaking down ideas. This is a sketch for a painting, some mural painting. So it's going to be up on some high wall or ceiling. And notice that he's conceiving of this. It's going to be this beautifully finished, realized little baby Jesus, beautifully lit, beautifully rendered, and he's just starting this out as an egg. Notice that the whole conception of that skull, if we remove it from the face construction and from the idea that it's a head, it's just an egg. And if I were to draw just an egg and then light that egg with a light source that's equivalent to what we have here, it would be very close to that. It would do that, or it would do that, or it would do this. It would do some version, give or take a variation, of what we see there. And so drawing the basic shadow shape of the forehead, throwing the features into shadow, in this case, in any way that's anywhere close to a simple egg on a table, is going to be what we'll start with. And that's the secret of making things up out of your head. That's the secret of animating things, conceiving things as so simple of an idea that we can render great detail on it, we can move it in space, and we can redesign it, reimagine it into more dynamic, into alien eggs and monstrous eggs and heroic eggs and all that kind of stuff for design. Let's go back to our figure one more time of the female. And we can see how, again, the simple conception of mommy here, the eye sockets marked out, give us a clear sense of where those eyes would be, but not very accurately. It's just roughly true. This eye over here maybe drifts out a little too far to the left. The nose gets a little dark here. The nose is probably a little too short for it. Maybe even the face is a little long, but probably not when you get the bottom of the chin here, and the rest of this is the bottom plane, the digastric plane in here. But anyway, there are or could be quite a few errors there. We finish that off, and maybe we find we should have had a little more skull, especially with the cloaked head or the hairstyle. all those little things, it should have been here, but it ended up here. It should have been here, but it ended up over here. Those little variations aren't a big deal, and they'll be easily corrected as we move on through the drawing. So as long as we get a fairly close approximation, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to stress out about that. Simple but characteristic, and as we simplify it and give it basic characteristics, the variations then don't matter. Those subtle inaccuracies don't matter. They can be corrected or left as a stylization or as a charming variation. Okay, here we have another Raphael. Beautiful head, one of the most famous drawings ever from the Renaissance. And we can see again the simple conception. In fact, if you look at just the hair, you can see the hair itself is rather egg-like, isn't it? We can feel kind of eggs in here, and little eggs in here. The Renaissance curls, a lot of roundness there. Eggs were huge in the Renaissance because eggs suggested the Christian idea of rebirth. An egg was a potential life coming into the world, and so it was used as a symbol for the religious painting that these often were. This was a saint in this case, and so it fits in with that. But let's go ahead and look for our shapes now. So we have a little bit of a dynamic position. It's a 3/4 view. That means we're going to see a lot of face and some skull. And we're on top of the view. That means the skull is going to dominate the face. So we're going to see even more skull and slightly less face. Now, when you get a very difficult, challenging position, and this isn't extreme, we'll get into that in another chapter, but it's extreme enough when we're starting out to give us trouble, or subtle enough that if we throw off things a little bit, we miss the point of the position, and it goes out of whack for us. So if we have a difficult position or a difficult shape, something that's challenging, oftentimes I'll go to the construction lines first. Let me just mark this over here so I have that to sample later. And here is that center line going down here. And there is that construction line, eyebrow line going here, with or without the eye line. Take your pick. So sometimes it's best to start that way. Then you can build on that sailboat shape. And notice how far off, let's say this is the actual chin without the beard. Notice how far off your constructed tips might end up. This should end up pretty nicely within, let's put it here, pretty nicely within the structure. But these two tips can stick way out, and we can chop them off later. Let's do that again here. This can come out here. We can chop it off later, like so. Just nip off those ends if we feel the need, like that. So sailboat shape, or we always have several choices as long as it's simple yet characteristic. Let's say I'm okay with not putting in the center line. I'm going to draw the mask of the face first. I'm going to draw the simplified far side of the face. I'm going to draw the simplified cheer into the jawline in front of the ear. I'm going to draw a simplified hairline. So just like it was a cutout Halloween mask, I'm going to conceive it of that. This is going to get totally lost in this case in those bangs, but that's okay. I need a shape to work with. I could come way down here, but it's nice if I can canonize my proportions, especially in the beginning. And if I always draw the, probably a little lower here actually, if I always draw the hairline, then I'm seeing a shape of the same proportion, give or take the character, the model, and not something that's radically changing because of a accident of costuming. And then I can add my center line right on down through. I'm looking to where the forehead meets the nose and where the lips meet the chin, anywhere in there. And if I'm off a little bit, that's okay. I can adjust it later or build around it later, and it won't be a problem. So there's my simplified idea. That's a mask of the face. That's not enough. We need to get the shape of the skull. And I'm going to look for the shape of the skull without the fullness of the hair. And notice I have a lot of room for error. I could be down in here, feel okay. It could be all the way out to the hair, do just fine, because the hair will cover it. I like to get it fairly accurate, though. Not because the skull matters in this instance, because it will be covered by the hair, but because it will matter oftentimes in how well I fit that neck in construction. So there's that hourglass idea of the neck. Let's get rid of this little pinch. We'll save that for a later structural talk. There's that hourglass shape. And then I put in the ear at this point because it's going to help hide that binding transition between mask of face and hair. It's going to show us how they fit together. And in this case, now if we come back and add our construction lines, maybe we didn't do the center line, let's do the center line. Now let's do the eyebrow line. Notice that the center line of the face and the eyebrow line of the features are all on the front of our shape. So if we continued that around, with a bucket idea, the bucket, whoops, let me adjust that a little bit. We put a bucket on the head. Notice that the eyebrow line follows the front, in this case the right side of the bucket, and the ear, if they're lined up pretty well as they are, follows the left contour, left side of that bucket. And notice in that tilting. Also notice it's almost always better to screw up the tilt of that bucket by making it tilt too much. Because what's our real problem here? The real problem is to fight off this flat paper or flat canvas we're on and give the idea, the illusion of three-dimensional form, of tilts and tips and facing dimensions. So if we know we have to fight that flatness to get the illusion, to get the idea, I'd rather overdo the idea a little bit to make it more exciting. If I'm doing a comedy as a film, as a story, I'd rather it be too funny than not funny enough. You can always back off later, but if it's not funny, that's tough to fix it later. So if you've got a real flat drawing, it's tough to push into it three-dimensional form. But if your form is a little too three-dimensional, tilting a little too much, it's easier to correct. Now notice what's going to happen. When I pick up let's just bring this all the way across here, and we could take the hairline and let that be roughly the top of the tube, and then notice that tubular idea, that tubular idea starts to break down when we add that skull going back. We don't get a good sense of the gesture going back. We don't get a good sense of how the back of the skull finishes against the back of the face there. But if we continue that down, notice that the consistency, and this is one of the powers of using simple constructed forms, is once you have that construction concept, the tilt of the bucket, then that's going to carry through on all the features and affect all the features. Notice how all the features track that same tilted construction line on the front of our tube. Not the tip of the nose, but from nostril to nostril, from corner of the mouth to corner of the mouth, or the very front of the lip or front of the tip of the nose, the eye line, eyebrow from arch to arch, bottom of the chin, and even in this case the beard is tracking that. So we have all, and even the bangs, the hairstyle tracks it with whatever little variations there are They're all tracking that same tilt, and that's what gives that dramatic dynamic illusion of that head in that lovely position. And then the ear is all alone, isn't it? That's one of the struggles we'll have is we have all this feature stuff on the front of the face to build nice three-dimensional positioning. But we only have the ear on the side to do it, at least apparently so. So we're going to have to work at that to get that sense. But eyebrow to ear does a lovely job of beginning that idea of that tilt. And then there'll be other things like the jaw line. As it drifts up, it's still giving a sense, an exaggerated sense, but a sense of that corner. We'll get into that a little bit later. But that gives us a sense of that. Notice that we could have drawn this any number of simple ways. We could have drawn an egg and played all this stuff along the curvature of the egg. Jawline comes up, swing all the way around from the eyebrow line over to the ear. Notice that that egg, though, is exceptionally unsatisfying for the skull. We've cut off all the back of the skull. We've left it out. So we'd want to add another egg going back so we get that drift back and get the fullness of the back of the skull that then it accepts our lovely hairstyle there. And also makes for a much more satisfying connection for the neck and body below it. And then we could also make it boxier. We could make it a boxy idea. This way, and then all the features here would set on the front of the box, and even the bangs, and the ear would be on the side of the box, and the hair and the skull would sit on the top of the box. Some way we'll have to figure out, and show the back of the box. So we've got choices. It's just a matter of which way you want to go. And it's a great exercise to do as I'm doing here. Draw those old master drawings, either draw over them digitally or trace over them, tracing paper in a book, or sketch them as you look at them as I'm doing here, and make those determinations. See which way Raphael leaned. Did he tend to use one idea or another? Did he use all three: tube, box, and ball? Okay, here's another Raphael, more dynamic position. Little baby here, of course. Get that to the side. And you can see now, here again is that triangle idea here. Or since it's a round baby and the egg is so important to the Renaissance, we can do as he did, let the egg dominate. Since the skull, we're in almost a full profile and we're on top of that head. There's a slight 3/4 move to that profile. And we're quite strongly on top of the head. And you can see how an accident in positioning, this happens oftentimes on male or on adult or child. When you get on top of the skull quite a bit, the bottom of your constructed skull here gets very close to your eye line, or eyebrow line. Actually, both. It gets very close to both because that skull cap, that mass of skull, is dominating the face in this case. So we feel it there. You're still going to want to be very careful on its positioning, but you'll see that quite a bit. And then here is the mask of the face in here, like so, and then the ear separates or makes a transition between those two constructed ideas. Now, when you have something very round like this, it gets real, especially if it's in a dynamic position, it can throw things off. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I construct this, let's say I constructed the skull like this, and I look at that model on the model stand or that photograph on my drawing board, and I see that the eyebrow line really works nicely as the bottom of the skull, and so I've sketched in. But look what happened here. I end up putting my eye and eyebrow line here, and it distorts things off. Let's do this to make it worse. See how distorted that is? That's way out of whack. So rather than that, I'll go ahead and construct it the same way. I'll use my eggs because that's in character. It's fairly easy to get big, simple shapes in space. In this case, we have that domination of the skull on top of the face shape like this. So it's almost this kind of idea, overlapping balls in recession. So all that's great to show the on top ofness of our problem here. So I go ahead and do that, but then I come back and I construct more carefully the end as a tubular idea, or as the egg tilting in the correct position. And I look to the nose and the features. Now, again, the danger of these features are they're going around the other side here. Going around the other side, and we can't see the other nostril. We can't see the other nostril. We can't see the other corner of the lip. And so we see this thing, and then eyebrow line, this thing. And notice when I just draw what I see, they're all going in different angles, and it's going to ruin the cohesion. Remember what we'd said before, if we think of it as a tube, the hairline, the eyebrow line, the eye line, the nose line, the mouth, the chin, all of those track together. They have their own quirkiness. The eyebrows arch, the eyelids maybe droop, the nose sticks out, the mouth changes expression, on and on and on. But they're going to track nicely, symmetrically from one side to the other. So again, let's look at our Raphael and how deceptive this can be. We look at these features, none of them track. And so we think, well, he's Raphael, he doesn't make mistakes. So I'm going to go ahead and draw what I see. I'm going to draw this and this and this and this, and your drawing's not going to look very good. So what Raphael did, and Raphael does make mistakes, but he didn't make it here. Everybody makes mistakes. In fact, the old masters that makes mistakes, and they all did consistently, we call that their style. They've stylized the world into a direction that is not exactly real, not true, not photographically true, but beautifully aesthetically true. And most importantly, whatever they've done, it's consistent. It's the inconsistencies that screw you off. So a Picasso might well make them all go off in different directions because Picasso is after a different kind of truth. But this character here, notice that the eyebrows do track. Here's the center line. And even though he drew the tip of the nose out and we can't see that other nostril, it would be on this same construction line. It would be over here. Same with the corner of the mouth. It would be on that same construction line. It would be over here, and the chin and such too. So go back one more time. Here's that center line going down where the forehead meets the nose, where the lips meet the chin. Notice that the eyebrow lines, he works very hard to tilt that far eyebrow up. In fact, he repeats it with the skull cap. Here's the casing of the skull intruding. That little baby skull dominates the face in younger critters. And notice how those all track beautifully our construction line. Let's bring it over here and just make it a bucket. Notice how the skull tracks back up here, here. Eye line tracks back up, or eyebrow line, whichever. Nose goes its own way, lips go its own way, but chin tracks back up. And then we'd add the big egg of the skull there. So back down here, chin tracks back up to that beautifully. Now let's look at the other features that failed us. Notice how we can't get the other nostril, but the tip of the nose tracks back up. The lower lid of the eye tracks back up. The lip, the Cupid doll curve of the lip even starts to track back up here. And the lower lip tracks back up beautifully. And so look at, even when the accident of information throws us off at the wrong angles, he works very hard to find places where we come back to the right angles, here and 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 here. And even the hairline is tracking that way more or less. Okay? So it does track beautifully, but in a tricky way, in a not quite apparent way to begin with. And you could even see the tone over here tracking with the cheek contour over here. That also tracks back up beautifully. All right, so here we have Norman Rockwell. It's a painting, but of course there's still going to be these drawn truths that we've been talking about in the painting, or in a sculpture for that matter. We can find them wherever. So Norman Rockwell was famous for his characters. Each personality, the male or the female, the young or the old, had a clear character to them. They were middle America, and they were personalities and even slightly caricatures he'd play up. So when we look at this young boy, for example, we're going to want to give a shape to him that is specific and different than the shape of the adult who's given him the lecture. And so notice what our friend Norman here has done. He's centered on a capsule shape. And notice, or it could be a tipped over tube, that bucket idea, this way, and it's tilted enough that the back of the tube, the tip of the tube there, let's do it over here, is not exactly right, but close to the final shape of the skull. He's still given a little bit more back here to give that movement down and back for our skull to face, a gesture of the skull going back this way in perspective, and the face going down slightly this way in a different perspective. But in the linear idea, they're almost in the same position. But anyway, he's picking up a capsule shape, let's call it. Down here probably. And so the very shape, the simplified shape that he chose for the whole head started him out simply, like any of these choices would have, but more characteristic to his final thoughts, to his final goal. And so by picking a shape that is specific, it's less work. Think of it as a sculpture. If we get a capsule shape of clay, that's going to be a lot less work to finish it out than if we got a big, perfect spherical shape of clay. So we want something that's close to the finish line. That's going to give us less work to render it out. Things are going to fit better because we'll be able to see clearer truths of proportion, and it's going to connect better to the next forms, the neck, the shoulders, all the hands in this case, all that kind of stuff. And notice how we're going to want to draw through the interruption of the hands and through the distortion that the hands create to feel where that chin would be. And then it's going to get mucked up by the pressure of the hands against it. So then our construction lines are pulling down this way. And he's slightly mucked with those construction lines, hadn't he? The eyebrow here is a little higher, and the eyebrow over here is a little bit lower, and that throws our construction line off tilt a little bit. It tilts it rather than being over here. It's falling down a little bit. And he continues that with the nose. The nose is tilting off axis a little bit. And then the lips come back pretty well, but the lower lip and chin get tilted off, and that's because of that pressure of the hand. This hand's doing more work because he's trying to get away from this guy. He doesn't want to hear what's being told him. And so the simple construction of the capsule now has been slightly distorted. He's created a physical error, in a sense, to tell a story. So this whole thing is starting to twist off. So it's like the tube actually tilted away a little bit. I'm exaggerating it, but it's trying to get away from the lecture. And we've all felt that at different times in our life. And so he's bringing that emotional truth into the constructed idea. And that's good picture making. That's smart stuff. So anyway, that gives us that sense. Let's go back one more time now. We'll just take this out and pick this up. There it is there, and we'll just play this way and this way and this way and go back to the generic truth and allow when we draw the final eyebrow line, all that kind of stuff, we'll give those distortions maybe if we were to take it that far. So there we go there. Here's a center line, of course, doing this, and as I said, drifting off a little bit. We can put that in or save it for later again. Get a more refined truth, that distortion idea later in the process. Stick with a more generic truth to begin with. Then let's look over at our fellow over here. There is that construction. Notice how the ear is pushing in a little closer to the front of the face, a little farther from the back of the skull. And that gives us a sense that he's turning away from us. He's facing into the canvas to give his 2 cents to this young man who doesn't want to hear it, wants to do anything but hear it. So we've turned him in a little bit. And notice what happens when that happens. There's the construction line there. And notice how if we were to pick up the brow and the cheekbone and the cheek and the chin, notice how the nose and lips are behind. Let's play this up a little bit stronger. And he's done a lovely thing. He's even put the chin slightly behind that jowl area. And so notice what that does for us. And we'll see in later construction lessons how to do this exactly. But notice how the construction line, what was this line, can become the side plane, the corner between where the side of the head sits and the front of the head sits. Let's do a more dramatic construction. See how that construction line there that just looked like it was the front of the face, as soon as we start to get in this dynamic, that becomes the corner of the face. And now all the features except the ear are around around that corner, hiding from us partially. And then the ear is the only the only feature that is on that side plane. And so it's doing this. Let's change that color. It's doing this going around the corner. Really important, interesting stuff. And it was done, let's do it one more time. It was done at a really simple stage, real simple conception. Let's do this. here. I just cut off those features. They're going to go around the corner eventually, but for now I'm just cutting them off because they're complicated, and I'm getting the simple yet characteristic truth, not the complicated truth at this point. There it is there. Or there's my gesture line of the face down that's so important. And then I draw this shape on that. Maybe that's more comfortable for me. And then I build this all the way through from the back. Or if I do that, maybe that goose me up and I think that's a jawline, put the ear in the wrong place. So instead, I draw the mask of the face in front of the ear, that sideburn area, front of the ear, down the jaw and chin, and then the simplified hairline in here. And then I draw the ear to show that dynamic transition between the two. And then I'm going to come right back to the chin, and I'm going to draw the simplified neck. Let's make it really long so we can see that neck's going away. I usually don't bother doing the tube construction because the neck doesn't last long. It'll fall into the shoulders in ways that we'll see. So there it is there. What was simple can become much more complicated. I can refine that hairline as it zigzags down in front of the ear, refine the back of the hair, add the hairstyle on top of that skull construction, and build from there. Okay, so this is Manet, and you can see with Manet, the kind of the father of Impressionism. He kind of led the way from the more traditional looks of Delacroix and Ingres and even Sargent and that bunch, to the Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, all the wild things like Picasso that came after. He was kind of that transition point. Very important character, oftentimes not looked at much by realists, people who like realistic things. They like Sargent more, Bouguereau, or those kind of things. But he's great because he simplifies things down, and yet that constructed truth is still there. So we can see the egg. You can see how relatively flat the rendering is. If we analyze, we'd find that all the structures, the key structures, are still there. But he's simplified and flattened, and we'll just leave it at that for now. It's flat, simplified truth, highly edited truth, but the key information is still right there to be found. And so we can see, let's do this, I guess. We can see that lovely egg idea. Oh, that doesn't work so well, does it? Let's do that. That lovely egg idea is right there. Right in there. Keep in mind again that when you draw the egg, oftentimes you short shrift the skull. So rather than drawing more of a elliptical egg, I harp on that because I make that mistake. And I see a lot of other people making that mistake. A lot of students in class make that mistake. So there it is. And notice here we could end the constructed egg at the chin or include that fold under the chin. That'd be the digastric plane, that bottom plane. You can do either one, or as I've done here, you could do both. Pick up both those. And then here it's slightly tilted, and slightly facing away, not a perfect profile. Now, when I'm trying to get the positioning of any form that I'm constructing, I'll compare it to a grid, to a perfect vertical and a perfect horizontal. If I don't think of that perfect vertical and horizontal, I'll tend to draw all my figures, unless they're wildly dramatic, in perfect vertical and horizontal. So if I didn't look to it, I probably would have drawn that like the Holbein, where it was straight on formal, looking at me like this, a T that's perfectly standing up. This T wants to tilt over a little bit and wants to face away a little bit. And so we're going to have the center line crowd this, and we're going to have the construction lines rise up slightly on the right. And since we don't have this dramatic position like we did on that little baby Raphael, we can clearly see the construction lines. I'm just looking from the corner of the mouth to the corner of the mouth, some point on the nostril or the wings of the nose across, maybe the outside corners of the eye and the arch of the eyebrow. And then the hairline does whatever it does, but you can see how we could come back for a moment here, find it here, or maybe you don't see it here, but maybe we find it here, where a bump in the hairline we can track across. If we could see both ears, those would track across, and so on. And then we build the shape of the hair. And when I do the hair shape, I want to make it simple yet characteristic. So I'd give these kind of rounded bun-like forms building on top of each other to make it characteristic. Maybe even a little bit of there. And then the ear has been placed in there already. And then notice, because it's a female, now the collar is hiding it a little bit, but because it's a female young woman, we notice, despite the costuming, that the neck is slightly thinner than the jaw and certainly the face shape. Okay, and notice, even through costuming, even through interruptions, notice where we see our construction lines. So you just find some convenient point for a shoulder line, and you can do that sagging triangle on there and get that connectivity of head and neck into shoulder girdle, shoulder construction that will take us beautifully down into the torso and beyond. Raphael again. He's great. I like his drawings because he keeps things simple. He edits out all the the dimple lines and frown lines, keeps it simple, idealized, and we can see those shapes more clearly. And because he's Renaissance, he picks up these round shapes. You can see the egg shapes in the arm here, all these little egg shapes, and all the way through the forms are egg shapes. All right, so this one has a real danger to it. And it's the danger of just sticking with eggs in a way. And we'll see that more clearly explained when we get into stronger construction. And we're going to find that the more constructed something is, the more architecture we want to put into it, the more dramatic positioning of forms, one form overlapping another, or the forms themselves being in dramatic perspectives, we're way underneath, there's three-quarter back view, then boxing things out is going to be very useful to us. The problem with eggs is they get so rounded that their position kind of throws us sometimes. And so notice that the wrap here, the head wrap, fits like this. And when we look to that, and then we do that face, we get that dropping skull idea again that gooses us up. It doesn't look right. So notice the ear is nice and low, getting close to the bottom of the face, farther away from the top. That tells us we're slightly on top of this head, maybe about this much. But I need to feel that skull, make sure I can get a skull, let's put it that way, all the way in there correctly. And remember, we need to have it more than just a right angle. It should open up a little bit. Now, when we get way on top of this, let's turn it into a box, a slightly more dramatic position box. Notice that this does tighten up this curve. The right angle construction starts to distort into a pinching angle. Now the back of the skull rises up a little bit, and that fights that. But that position does kind of reinforce that tightening up of that angle, but we don't want to do it too much. So here's what I mean. Here's the construction line of the face. And here is, you can see that with this little sketching here, the bump down in here, There is the skull right there. Let me do it again in a dark line. In a dark line, that's what we're seeing there. Notice the difference now. Let me do it one more time. Construction line of the face. There is the skull in its correct position. He didn't screw up. How about that? And then the ear sits here, that transition between the two. Notice that this bumps in here a little bit. And this digastric plane actually even feels like it goes behind the ear, and it does. But the jaw itself is always in front of the ear, so make sure you're aware of that, so you don't attach the talking jaw back here somehow. And again, that ear does wonderful work for us, doesn't it? It shows, by getting close to the front of the face, it shows that we're turning away here. Turning away. Face is turning away. And by dropping down from the top of the head, it shows that we're slightly on top of that position. And then the head wrap helps, even though it's going its own direction, it's still wrapping around the perspective of that tubular idea, that on top ofness idea. And we'll learn more about that again as we get more into more sophisticated positions. And then here's that neck going back beautifully. We have a little bit of that bottom plane going back. Here'd be the other side of the neck if we could see through our construction. Our shoulder line is in here, going into deep space this way. And then we build on top of that. So we only get a bare sense of that sagging triangle idea in deep perspective. All right, so here we have Tiepolo, and we have a back view and slightly underneath. And so, of course, in our back view, the skull dominates. And you can see this growth pattern gives us a sense of the back of the skull. And if we were to track this down, the center line of the back of the skull, center line of the neck, that once we get into the neck, we follow the spine, and that takes us all the way down. That spine becomes a wonderful center line for gauging that facing dimension. Which way is it turning? You can also see the ears. This ear is outside the contour of the constructed head. This ear is going to be inside the constructed head with the face that we haven't done. So let's pull that back for a second and do it again. And we can see now we've got the face, gesture of the face going down this way. Now the problem we have is all those features are missing, and it just feels like you just got floated away from your dock and you got nothing to hold on to when you don't have those features. So we've got to work more carefully here. So what I'm going to do then is feel the neck. And the neck, you can feel your own neck, and you'll find that the neck comes from right behind the ear. And the actual muscle is called the sternocleidoid mastoid muscle. And that's what creates that tubular shape of the neck from a front, back, or three-quarter view. You get into a side view, and then that sternocleidoid mastoid is inside the contour. We'll use it from there in different ways that we'll see, but it doesn't create the contour. And so here's our nice bent tube of a neck coming from off the ears. The face is outside that. We just see it on this side. We don't see it on this side. And then we have the construction line, the shoulder line here, tilts this way. When I see hunching shoulders like this, and they're hunching partly because it's a figure well up above us, which is typical with Tiepolo because he did a lot of murals on the ceiling, and so you wanted to give the illusion that those figures were above us. And so oftentimes we get that underneath curvature like a tube. And so I would go ahead and draw a hunching line for the shoulders. But then, let me take that off to be clear. A hunching line for the shoulders, and then there's the shrugging muscle on that. Shrugging muscle. And notice that the shrugging muscle comes inside the constructed neck, and the neck is inside, meaning on top of. The shrugging muscle is on top of the constructed neck. The constructed neck is on top of the face, and we can't see it over here. But we get this stair step. Let's do it over here. Shrugging muscle is here. Neck is behind that. Behind that. And face is behind that. So we have this stacking of forms going away. Very important from the back view. And then the ears, this ear is inside the constructed contour. This ear is outside the constructed contour, and that does most of the work. We have that hair pattern that he's added in, but that's a secondary detail. The ears really are doing most of the work to show that we're in a not perfect back view, but a slightly turned to the left back view. The other thing that does the work is the asymmetry of seeing face over here and no face on this side. So tricky stuff, isn't it? We have to just slow down and work that out. Eventually it becomes intuitive and you can go after it. But in the beginning it's tricky. And doing tracings, constructions, as I'm doing here, is a great way of working out those truths, to figure out the nuances, the little things that you wouldn't think of if you didn't have to draw it, but are crucial for our audience, our lay people, our viewers to understand it when they see it. So let's stop there with our old masters, and then we're going to come back with some drawing session exercises for you and for me to join in on. So I'll see you momentarily. Coming up now is our time pose section. I want you to go ahead and draw the head from the reference that we're providing. It'll be time, but if you go a little over or you finish a little quicker, that's fine. What I want to do is see that basic head construction done. Go ahead and give it a shot and see how it goes for yourself. Now it's my turn to work with the time pose. So I'm going to go ahead and do my basic instruction based on the reference, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so hopefully you've drawn your own set of drawings. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw. You can watch me, you can draw along with me, and I'll give you my own tips and pointers as we go along. I should tell you my materials now. I'm using just a fountain pen. This happens to be a Waterman Paris, a kind of a mid-range or even low-range fountain pen, and just a sepia brown ink. I'm also using Faber-Castell, and these are just a sanguine tone, any kind of brown range. These happen to be 9201-192, and it's a nice soft brown, kind of orange brown. All right, so now it's my turn. So I'm going to draw the biggest, simplest, most characteristic shape I can. I'm working about 1.5 to 2 inches in real size, whatever it is on your screen. That's what it is to me. And it can be down to about 1 inch. It can be up 3 inches. You get too big, it just takes a lot of time to lay it out. You get too small, it's too much minutia. Every little move becomes a big deal on a little head. So the eyes can get out of whack quickly. Sometimes you want to kind of plot out exactly where the features, or roughly where the features are, to get a sense of whether it's working for you. Notice I'm drawing several marks for every one mark. I'm making sure the head connects into the neck, and you can even take it into the shoulder line. And don't feel like you have to finish. Just pick out as much as you need to in the time you have. Okay, here we have a 3/4 view. I'm going to, just for the heck of it, I'm going to start with the center line of the features and the eyebrow line, and then build around it. And I'm going to draw the mask of the face, since it dominates the positioning of this head. But any order that works for you is the correct order. In this case, I notice the ear is a little bit lower, more towards the eye line. Now I'm going to come in and refine the hairline to make sure it rings true for that mask of the face. And of course, as you're drawing, you can stop it, go back, do it several times to work out, but don't get any more detail than this. Just roughly the shapes that you need. And I'm going to say, well, I'm liking what I'm doing. I just want to clean that jaw line up. I'm going to cheat and steal, 5, 10, 20 more seconds. Nobody's going to ever know. You won't be downgraded. The new master's police won't show up at your door. Just go ahead and do that. But don't spend 20 minutes on it. Okay, here we have that sailboat shape. I'm going to take it back almost as far as I go down, or as far, anywhere in there, because her hairstyle will make the correction. It's not quite a perfect profile. So I'm going to lay in a little bit of that center line. So I did quite a bit of work with the features there to get a sense of how far down I want to go with that mask of the face and how far back I want to go. Sometimes I'll even kind of feel eye socket, cheekbone, sideburn area, so I can be more clear on where that ear sits. Feeling that nice digastric plane, that is crucial in giving volume to that mask of the face. Okay, here we go. This is more of a perfect mask, perfect profile, but we're gone slightly around the other side this time. So we're going to have a slight recession of those front features, all the front plane of the face, and that means the ear is going to get a little closer. If I'm going to screw up, it's better to get a little closer yet. And I can feel where the eyebrow and eye sit in here, nose, mouth, just marking off the information, not defining it, not analyzing it, just positioning a few of the little things so I have a better confidence in the big things. Sometimes I'll even lay in a couple loose lines like that, and I'll let the audience choose. Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? And you'll decide which the best answer is and bail me out. So sometimes you can lay in a couple. You don't want to do that everywhere, or you're just not committing and you're not learning. But every once in a while, you can lay in a couple of those little marks and let the audience help you. Now we're getting on top of the head. That means the skull will dominate the face. So maybe I'll go ahead and draw the skull shape. And if there were a part down the center of her hairline, it would run in here. The face is going to be shorter than it normally would be. It's foreshortening. So literally getting shorter visually, just not actually. and you're not going to be sure where it's at. So you make your best guess, and then you build some of the secondary detail, the hairline again. Here's the ear. The ear will get a little foreshortened too. And eyebrow line, eye line, nose, mouth, chin, neck. So we're not trying to make these pretty drawings. I'll start with a different procedure this time. We're just trying to get the basic big stuff, the big information, the big construction stuff. We're framing in the house. We're not decorating it. And sometimes you'll come up with some really lovely little moments in the drawing, even at this stage. That's great. But that's not the point. The point is to learn to see, to learn to analyze, to mark down the key important things, making the choices on prioritizing what has to be there, as opposed to what would be fun to have there, what would be cool or neat or beautiful. Neat shows my age, I guess. Shouldn't say neat. Rad, how's that? What should be fad? All right. And sometimes you might finish a little early. That's fine too. You don't have to keep going. But there's always things you could do, getting secondary forms after you get the primary forms, going back and double checking those primary forms a second time, maybe pushing it a little bit farther than it is in the reference to make a aesthetic point or to play up a lovely feature, all that kind of stuff. Here's the profile again. Comes down. We'll play up this whole big shape. I'll draw it like it's a flat profile, and then I'll come back over it and feel the constructed idea. And notice how I'm doing the eyebrow line this way, the chin line this way. I'm exaggerating them to get that on top of the box idea. And doing something like this in a difficult position early on, you might spend all the first minute just getting half of this as far as I am here. So don't feel like you have to finish. Draw decisive, and so I'll draw fast so that I'm making clean, crisp motions. I'll draw fast so it encourages me to get the big ideas and ignore the little ideas. I won't draw fast because I'm out of control and desperate to finish. So make sure you're drawing the speed that works for you, not the speed that somebody else is doing and that you wish you could do. Okay. All right, now we're on top, so the skull dominates, and we're getting behind the head, and so the skull dominates even more. So we're going to have less face showing, and we're going to have the face receding into foreshortened position here, more like this. So that ear gets very, very close to the front of the face. Better to be a little too close. And the ear gets lower. Better to be too low. The eye socket, I'll do a little bump there because we can't see the eyes too well. There, and the nose all sit very high. And if you could see a part down the center of the hair, and you can kind of, where the hair is being gathered and pulled back, it tends to fall down there. Go ahead and pick that up. Okay, and let me make a real quick point about this for a moment. Notice what would happen if I did the same thing and then did the nose and the eyelashes, and maybe you could see some lips in there. it's going to have the silhouette maybe that's very accurate to like a shadow on the wall, but it's going to look flat because it's going to take the nose and the lips and whatever else the part of the eye or eyebrow you see, and it's going to take it from the front plane way over here and bring it around to the side plane. And it's going to kill that corner and just flatten it out. So we want to make sure that in our constructed beginning here, notice how, I'm going to make it dark here, notice how the cheekbone and the forehead eye socket bumps, but creates one continuous line. Sometimes it'll break a little bit around the chin, that line, like this. That's fine to show or not show. But then we want the nose and all the other features, there's no lips showing in this case, but if they were, the lips as a line behind, and I actually break them. Bottom of the nose, bottom of the lip, let's say. Here's the chin. And here's the ear in here. I actually break them away from the line, so they're kind of ghosted back. And I usually draw the bottom plane where a light source would show. If we shaded this egg like that, the light would hit the top and it would get shadow on the bottom. So I'm showing the shadow side, the darker side that would be the most visible because it's catching dark shadow on this white paper. So I do all I can to kind of visually push that back, break it up, separate it away, and keep it discontinuous throughout. Okay, fuller back view. I'm going to draw the skull that I know is there, and the ear. I always draw the front of the ear first so I know just how close it is, the ear is getting. And when you get well behind that ear, I'm doing a little double line, and you can take it into, whatever you see of the rest of the ear, or you can just keep it as a double line, and that shows the thickness, again, a corner from the back of the head to the side of the head that ear is showing. So pick up that. The cheekbone is way up here. This pulls down here. And the skull, if there's no hair or short hair, let's do that. So it looks like it's just a skull with a face. It would look something like that. That's what I drew. In this last one I drew really partly, I began with a skull shape and then I quickly went to the hair shape. In this one I did the skull shape mainly because it's good practice and I wanted to show you. But what I would have done in my own drawing, I would have just drawn the whole hair, making sure I allowed for a full mass of skull in there, and then picked up the bun. So I'm actually drawing the hairstyle. And in that hairstyle, oftentimes I'll look for, let's do that, where the top becomes the back right there. And you can see here how this speeds up, comes down here. That's suggesting that top and back. Anytime we can do that, it's going to give a little bit more volume. It'll make sure I don't cut off that skull a little bit. I kind of punch it out just a bit. So you have your choice there, but do some practice where you're drawing the full skull through the interruption of the hat or the hairstyle, and then build that fashion, that costuming on top of that. Okay, now we're underneath. So now this egg shape or capsule shape is going to get shorter. And we'll go over this carefully. We'll do a whole section where we deal with difficult perspectives. But as this goes up and away, we're underneath it. All these distances, eyebrow, the forehead and such, are going to get shorter on us. And so you have to be a little more careful in your positioning of things to make sure you're respecting that new visual. most especially how short the nose gets underneath. We'll figure out exactly why that's the case in another time, but and notice because of the awkward and difficult, and this is kind of an awkward view when you're underneath, because of that awkward view and the difficult view, I'm drawing this whole section here is the underside of the nose. I'm drawing the whole circle of the lips to feel the full volume of the lips, and later I'll rough out more detail as I need to. But I'm getting those full volumes so I can break this space up and be more clear on where things end. And then I'll find the bottom of the chin, and the rest of this that I laid in, more or less, I'll give it some shadow here. That's that digastric plane again. That makes sure that it doesn't look like a Halloween mask. So it's really important whenever you see underneath the head that you show some of that mass of the face going back to the neck, that bottom plane of the face. And then there's that. And I didn't get any chance to do the rest of it. That would have been fine. In this case, I'm going to do it just to point out when you get underneath, look how low the ears get, way down here. And then notice, especially in the underside view of the face like this, almost always you end up drawing just the mask of the face and not the full skull with whatever hairstyle is going on. So make sure you add that back in. Okay, 3/4 profile. And we're way underneath it. Again, if you think of it as a box or as a tube, notice how this front side to her, which is our left side, rises way up, and then moves off along. This comes around slower, this comes around quickly, but it changes direction. But that first movement where all the features are, except for the ear, is going way up. You can't underestimate that, really. So better to make it much deeper than it really is than to make it less than it is. Here's the root of the nose in here, the mouth in here, the chin in here. Notice again, it's a difficult view, so I take more time to work out the details. Always take that little extra to get some of the neck connection there. Okay, in this case, I'm going to draw the whole mask of the face as an egg. It just feels egg-like to me, so I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to lay on my center line to show how it's facing, my eyebrow line to show how it's tilting in and out of the page. And then the ear is way back here someplace. Nose, mouth, chin. Notice even the chin goes in the same direction. Digastric plane tucks under. You can even give it a little bit of tone there to mark it off if you want, although we haven't talked about how to do that, but you can kind of coat it. Okay, so that's my time on that. But notice what I did with the last few seconds. I went back and kind of touched each of these areas, or as many areas as I had time to do, to make sure they all related together. Because otherwise, you tend to kind of draw this, and then you draw this, and then you draw this, and you draw this, and you kind of scan across, but you've never taken a look at the whole until you stand up and walk away from your piece. So I want to keep a process where I'm juggling all the balls at once. I lay in my construction lines here, and then I go over here to some other constructed shape, but then I compare that shape back to those construction lines. This to this, but this to this, and these to this, and this to that, and this over here to this down here. There's relationships throughout. You can find angles playing off that you can pick up. There's all sorts of ways to feel your relationships back and forth. So as you do your art, constantly juggle, keep juggling, come back, find a little mark, maybe add a little more detail, but just to bring you back to that place so you can compare that to something else over here and this to something over here. And you're constantly rhythmically relating on through. I always think of an orchestra conductor who's playing, drawing in the brass section against percussions and the woodwinds, and each instrument in each section is playing with and against and through the others. And so there's this mighty composition, this dance of ideas, form, sounds. That eyebrow line to ear is just invaluable when you're trying to plot things out in dynamic position. Finding the chin to jaw line up back in front of the ear, that sideburn area, is going to help us feel that underneathness. We'll get a better handle on that when we get into our second section on intermediate construction. Okay, so here we're way underneath and behind. So that ear is going to crowd the front of the face and crowd the top of the head, and much better to overdo it. In other words, push it too high up, too far forward. You can use that hairline. It's always a great way to kind of measure a sideburn over to the eyebrow eye socket area. Great way to measure to make sure this distance is about right. There's that full jaw of hers. And then here's the skull shape, and here. And here is the hairstyle building out from that and adding to that. Okay. Okay, that's our lesson for the basic head structure. I hope it gave you some good pointers to work with, some new information. I hope some of the assignments helped kind of codify that information, make sure it's going to work in practice and not just in theory. And as all these lessons go, watching them more than once is a great idea. Go back to them over and over again. This is tough information. There's a lot of fine points there that you may not pick up the first time, and you can always use more practice, as we all can, of course. So go ahead and look at that a few times, but when you're ready, go on then to our next lesson. Our next lesson will be intermediate head structure, and I'll see you there.